Welcome to the Greenfield Report with Greenfield, your gateway to understanding today's geopolitical landscape. With 50 years of experience across 10 countries, Henry shares expert insights on world affairs, offering practical solutions and engaging guest perspectives. Dive into the Greenfield Report for lively discussions on the issues that matter.
This is Henry R. Greenfield for the Greenfield Report, with part 2 of speaking to Dr. Eric Hendriks on China and its relations with the global economy. And in this section, we are going to talk and complete our discussion as Dr. Hendriks was laying out on some of the challenges for the China economy, for the U.S. economy, and how it has been imbalanced, recognizing several leading experts in the global economic side. So, Dr. Hendriks, you were speaking to us about why are these two economies imbalanced? And in your view, is the Trump way of tariffs the best way to get back in balance, or is that going to make it worse?
Yeah, so I'm relying on the macroeconomists that I'm reading. And I mentioned Michael Pettis of Peking University, an American macroeconomist teaching at Peking University, and Ray Dalio, the financial guru and the social theorist. The structural asymmetries in the macroeconomy are such that America runs the structural trade deficit, and that structural trade deficit is coupled with the dominance of the dollar. Very simply put, America has a structural trade deficit, so that puts all these dollars in circulation outside of the US. What do other people do with these dollars? Well, they use them for trade, right? If America would have a structural trade surplus, dollars would be flowing back into the US, and dollars couldn't be as dominant a currency for global trade, and it couldn't be as dominant in the reserve capital sphere. So all of that is linked, and so what the Trumpists seem to want is they want to have their cake and eat it too, and they misrecognize the actual structural problems that they're facing. So eating their cake, having their cake and eating it too, is they want to have the dominance of the dollar preserved. They want the Wall Street stock markets to flourish, but they also want to stop the financialization of the American economy and reindustrialize.
Isn't that a lot of cake and no pain?
It's a lot. It's lovely. It's the most delicious cake ever. And the problem here is, of course, that the financialization of American society is, of course, tied up with the flourishing stock market on Wall Street. And all of that is, again, tied up with the structural trade deficits and with the struggles that you see in American manufacturing. So the problems the real social problems to which the Trumpists are half consciously responding, but they don't really understand the structural challenge that they're facing, and therefore they're using the wrong tools. They in their imagination, and I've spoken to quite some Trumpists, right? And a lot of Trump speakers come to my institute here, the Danube Institute, where I work here in Budapest, and we have so many high-level American speakers, but I must say, the Trumpist American speakers seem to have a misconception of what America's role in the world is, because they think that America is constantly being abused and taken advantage of. Whereas actually what's happening is America is the center of a financial system, and that has certain adverse social effects in the United States. Now, someone like Michael Pettis would agree that this has adverse effects in the United States. So his solution would be to rebalance. And for that, you would need some austerity, maybe limited capital controls. Imagine you put capital controls, which like South Korea's capital controls, Japan, China, all these countries use capital controls to sort of stabilize their external relationships, right? Their trade balance. The United States doesn't do that, which is why it's so such a safe haven for money to flow to, right? If America would actually stop that incoming capital, it would diminish the power of the dollar, which Trumpists don't like, but it would also be the first step towards definancializing the United States. On the flip side, and Michael Pettis has also been arguing this, it would really have helped if the Chinese would have done this, because the Chinese could, from their side, also rebalance things by investing more in their own consumption market.
Okay, well, this is fantastic theory, because as you know from previous Greenfield reports, our listeners will know that I did talk about how Trump blinked last week, where the bond market got wobbly. And that bond market is what holds up the U.S. economy, the whole, as Dr. Hendriks is talking about, financialization of the economy. So what we're hearing from Dr. Hendriks is it's one of the big imbalances is, in fact, this financialization. And he suggests, through some very noted economists and others, that the rebalancing needs to have a period of austerity. Now, if you also remember in the Greenfield report, we talk about balancing the U.S. budget. And there's a lot of fiddling that's going around with tax cuts and with blowing up various agencies. So I don't want to add to the confusion here, but in my view, what Trump is doing, and I think most economists in the world are, the tariffs are the wrong instrument to start with a war with China. And then secondly, it's not going to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish. So as we have noted several times in a nonpartisan approach, that if Trump wants to do something, well, first of all, he should do it or not do it. And the second thing is tariffs are not going to work, especially if he's looking at it just from a revenue point of view. So it's hard to say exactly what Trump wants out of this. But let's move on, if we can, for a moment to the Europeans, as we've not spoken about them yet. So what is Europe's participation in this or not in the tariff war and in their relationship with China?
Yeah, so Europe right now is having its own little skirmish with the American administration. That, of course, dramatically undermines any alliance building potential. The Chinese have been terrified of the prospect of a united Western world. And Trump has actively undermined that, because from this Trump style American exceptionalism, America is too powerful to need Europe against China. Which, okay, you could have that as your guiding philosophy, and then if you pair that guiding philosophy with putting tariffs on the EU and hitting the American German car industry, which is also very important for Central Europe as a whole, and then of course you cannot then later on ask for any solidarity against China. In fact, Germany, the most important industrial nation in Europe, is very much reliant on its China connections in production.
So is Europe going to sit this one out? Are they going to make separate deals with the United States and not have tariffs? And then again, are they going to make separate deals with China? As it seems, by the way that Japan and Korea are making deals now. Xi Jinping is on his victory tour through Vietnam, signing deals. So is the U.S., in your opinion, going to be isolated and not have that Western alliance anymore? Is that damaged, in your opinion, or not?
It's been heavily damaged, and the prospect of a Western alliance, and in some way that helps Europe out, because we have a lot of problems with Russia, and the sanctions that we put on Russia are very detrimental to Central European economies. And then if we also had to fight a trade war against China, perhaps under the wing of a influential democratic administration, it would have been quite destructive to Europe's economic future. But Trump gives us an easy pass, because we can now just point at Trump and say, oh, well, he's trade warring against us too. And so that helps us out. I mean, you should remember that European elites are overwhelmingly pro-democratic party. So no matter who the Republican president is, a Republican administration tends to have less diplomatic clout in Europe. And so this comes at a great time for Europe, because we definitely want to be out now. And Trump is making it very easy for us to stay on the sidelines.
So a lot of the commentators, I think you're saying the same thing here, is Trump inadvertently making Europe great again by having them go their own way, at least partially?
Yeah, so there's an upside to this. So if you're being a friend, I mean, I wish well on America, of course, and I feel sad when that America seemed to make some self-destructive moves. But with my European friends, when we sit together, we are discussing some upsides to this. Europe needed to reindustrialize as well, and the German industry had stagnated. So now that when JD Vance comes to Munich and he scares the Europeans, and that leads to new investments in Poland, Sweden, and Germany, that's actually great. And then when we also get to escape an escalating trade war against China, it's like a double win for Europe. So potentially, the Europeans keep their heads cool and build their factories. This could actually work out for the European side. But of course, there is such a thing as Western civilization. And the United States, because of its historical role and its size, would be the natural leader of something like the Western world. So if America and Europe are divided, the Western world as a whole lacks leadership.
Okay, well, that's a subject for another discussion. Well, we are sitting here in Hungary, and if you could just give us a word on what Hungary is doing with the Chinese, as my understanding is, they have invited the Chinese in on several levels.
That's right. So Hungary it's a small country, it's just 10 million people, and it's a mid-sized economy. It's much smaller than, let's say, the German economy or the French economy. This tiny little Central European state has quite some geopolitical ambitions, and it's managed to become the EU state with arguably the best China relations, while also maintaining relatively okay ties with the Russians, good ties with Erdogan in Turkey, and good personal ties with Trump. The Hungarians have been trying to outflank the European Commission and the push to centralize geopolitical decision making in Brussels.
Are they being successful in your view?
They were. So the China move was maybe successful. It's just that now with the Trump move, which also seemed very successful when Trump got reelected, things are a bit shaky, because when Trump puts the tariffs on the EU and he puts it on the car industry, that hurts Hungary, because the Audi and other German car manufacturers produce from Hungary. So this is actually now an economic threat to Hungary. So some Hungarian voters will look to Orban and say, "Hey, Prime Minister, you had such great personal ties with Trump, but what did it benefit us in the end?" So that's something that the Fidesz party, the leading party here in Hungary, will have to work with. So they will have to reassure Hungarian taxpayers and voters that indeed the special relationship between Orban and Trump is gonna pay off. And then at the same time, they will have to do this. I wouldn't call it a balancing act. They would have to do this balancing act with China and Turkey and Russia and the United States. But it's not really a balancing act. I think it's Hungary is trying not to be absorbed by the big blob, and maintain some of its sovereignty this way. And in that, there are some success. They've been successful in inserting their sovereignty, but now it's also the question: in having asserted their sovereignty, can they actually have a policy that works economically for their voters?
Well, all I can say is, while there are a lot of challenges, Viktor Orban is one of the most nimble politicians that I've ever seen, at least in the last 30 or 40 years in Europe. And I would never count him out. Now, just moving on, just to kind of finish our discussion today, can you just say a few words about the decoupling of the Chinese economy from the U.S. economy? Is that actually happening, and will it work?
So things are changing constantly. So we first thought that we were going towards a near total decoupling of trade between the U.S. and China, but then President Trump suddenly announced exceptions for electronic goods, which are arguably the most important part of the Chinese exports to the United States. But then he again turned around and he said, "Oh, they're exempt from the exemptions are only for the reciprocal tariffs, but there's another batch of tariffs which is called the anti-fentanyl tariffs, and the electronics may still be hit in that way." So there's people are completely confused about which tariffs are going to apply to which categories of goods, and the confusion itself has already caused a disarray in Chinese-American trade, and we can only, the economy is so complex that we'll have to see in the coming months how this plays out, because the maybe it's not the trade volume itself that is the crucial issue. It's the question is, how many of the value chains that you have in the United States will be crucially disrupted. Because if you have a value chain and like 20 parts of that do not involve China, but the one part that does involve China, somehow you can't replace.
Yeah, I agree with you. This has also happened in the auto industry, where I come from, Detroit. Parts going back and forth. It's very difficult to have tariffs on things. It goes on one side, comes back the other side. And so, yes, it's not just the totality, but it's the sum of the parts. Moving on to our final area, and thank you for that. It's the discussion. Would you like to say a few words on the future of Taiwan and the PRC? And is there more stability or less stability right now in the relationships since Trump is back and Biden has left?
The situation is ominous. The Chinese have used the last 2 years to launch a massive diplomatic campaign to convince governments throughout the global South to sign statements declaring Taiwan China relations an internal Chinese matter. They're doing this in preparation for a move on Taiwan. Militarily, they've been preparing. The people's military Liberation Army is planned to be ready for a Taiwan scenario in 2027. And I can tell you from the Chinese intellectual life, things look bleak as well, because an entire library of political theories has been prepared to legitimize a Taiwan scenario. There's already, the philosophies have already been written. So we already know exactly what mainland China is going to tell us when it makes a move on Taiwan. They're going to say that they were provoked, the reunification was voluntary. It's for the benefit of the whole of the world, because China is this foundation of world harmony. But for China to deliver world harmony, in which all the different nations and cultures can flourish in a harmonious diversity, it needs to be whole, and in order to be whole, it needs Taiwan, etc., etc. So the situation is rather ominous, and exactly at this point, America's East Asian alliance is breaking down, and we'll see where this goes. If China gets a sense that America is weakened, it may make a move real quick. So we may actually see a move on Taiwan towards the end of Trump's second term in office.
Well, that is rather ominous, and it's not a wonderful conclusion, but I think it's important that our listeners have some idea and understanding of what learned experts such as yourself, Dr. Hendriks, watching this for many decades, have come to that conclusion. As we finish up, Dr. Hendriks, are there any last words that you would like to add on China in the world? Is it moving in a direction that you believe they will achieve that global dominance, or is it still in the balance? And will Trump actually, in the end, prove victorious, or will the United States recede?
Well, I think it's there's no scenario in which China could establish itself as a kind of general world leader and take on the kind of role that America had on the world stage in, let's say, the mid-90s. That is not in the cards. But we do seem to be moving towards a more multipolar world, in which you will have China and the United States as the two largest powers. And such an order can be manageable, but things can also spin out of control in absolutely catastrophic ways. So
is that more likely under Trump than it was under Biden?
I mean they have their, so the problem with the Democrats is that they had a lot of neocons, and neocons are dangerous in foreign policy because they're hyper idealistic and they do not put conflicts into perspective. On the other hand, we now have a kind of naive Trumpists who seem to be out of their depth. So it's really, I'm really conflicted on who's more dangerous when it comes to starting wars. Of course, the danger now is less that America starts some kind of Bush era invasion. And the danger is more that powers like China will be encouraged to move assertively in their
and take advantage of the situation.
Yeah.
Well, once again, our thanks to Dr. Hendriks. This has been a very sobering discussion with Dr. Hendriks. As you can see, he's also, while he's been in the United States, he's lived obviously in China. He does have a European perspective that is not often heard in the U.S. He also participates in the Danube Institute, which is a self-proclaimed center-right. And as he said, there are many Trump advisors and speakers who come there. So he gets to hear and gets to speak with a lot of Trump people directly. So this is not just a theoretical exercise. So I would like to thank Dr. Hendriks for this incredibly informative report.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hendriks. And this is Henry R. Greenfield for the Greenfield Report, signing off from the heart of Europe, Budapest, Hungary.
Thank you for joining us on the Greenfield Report with Henry R. Greenfield. We hope today's insights into the ever-shifting geopolitical landscape have sparked your curiosity and broadened your perspective. Stay connected with us for more in-depth discussions and expert solutions. Until next time, keep exploring the world beyond the headlines.